The village of Sleepy Hollow was between two big mountains down in the valley. And during the Revolutionary War, the Hessians came through Sleepy Hollow. They burned down the bridges, they burned down the barns and the fields that they grew their corn. And the people fought back. They fought against Hessians because the Hessians were not the British in the Revolutionary War. They were German. And they did not care at all. They did not care at all about who won or who lost the war. They were just paid well to fight. And so the British Empire paid these Hessians to fight. And they were cruel and they were mean. And, well, in the fighting in Sleepy Hollow, one of those Hessians' heads was hit with a great big cannonball. And they never found his head when they were picking up the dead. Well, the war ended and Sleepy Hollow became the sleepy town that it was. But one day the town got wealthy enough that they could hire a school teacher. Ichabod Crane. He was a tall, lanky guy with a big nose and a big Adam's apple, and he always had his head in a book, and he was always reading, and because he liked to read well, he had a great imagination. And the village of Sleepy Hollow was so grateful to finally be wealthy enough to send their kids to a school with a school teacher. Wow, that was good. In fact, everybody loved having Ichabod Crane in the village. So each night he would be invited to go to dinner at this house or that house, for the villagers wanted to get to know this educated man. Well, it wasn't long before Ichabod Crane met Katrina van Tassel. She had long curling hair. She had bright, shiny eyes. And Ichabod would go to her father, who was the wealthiest farmer in all of Sleepy Hollow, and they would sit and they would talk. And Katrina flirted. But Brom Van Brunt was a farming boy. He had big, broad shoulders and a booming voice, and he did not care that Katrina von Tassel was giving attention to this lurpy, tall, Adam's apple, big-nosed, book-loving Ichabod Crane. And so one day they were at a party, and, well, it was in the fall when the sun set quickly and the moon had silvery light and the leaves would crunch when you stepped on them. And they went to dinner, and Katrina was sitting by Ichabod and asking lots of questions. And Brom Van Brunt did not like that. So he said, "Have you heard some of the Dutch wives' tales, Ichabod?" And he said, "No, what are the Dutch wives' tales?" "Oh, the old Dutch women tell ghost stories." And Ichabod said, "Ghost stories?" "Yes." And Brom Van Brunt told ghost story after ghost story after ghost story. And Ichabod was like, "Ooh." Because Ichabod had always read so much that his imagination, well, it would run wild. And Ichabod Crane told the story of the Headless Horseman, that Hessian in the Revolutionary War that's head had been blown off by a cannonball. And it was said that on dark, silvery moonlight lit nights, you could hear of the Headless Horseman on his horse. And if you tried to get away from the Headless Horseman, it only got faster. And they would come after you. But the Headless Horseman, once you would pass over the bridge into the churchyard, he would never go there, for he was not a religious man. And the churchyard was sacred. So everybody would say, get to the churchyard, get to the churchyard. When they would hear the Headless Horseman, get to the churchyard. Well, by the end of the night, of all of the Dutch wives' scary stories, Ichabod Crane was certain that there were ghosts at every turn of the corner. He got on Gunpowder, the old horse that he rode around. Gunpowder had a swayed back, and he would just clip-clop at a slow rate. In fact, Gunpowder was so slow he couldn't even pick up a run if he tried. And after Ichabod Crane said, "Good night, Katrina. It was nice to talk with you," Ichabod went out into the dark. Ichabod looked around. There was nobody there. There was nobody there. Oh, it's just the stories in my head, he thought. And he went and he started to hear as his horse went. And Ichabod twisted around. He twisted around his neck, twisted all the way around that he looked kind of like an owl. And he looked around, but there was just a smoke and moonlight. And he said, "Gunpowder, let's get going, Innie. Let's get going." And Gunpowder went from his to, and he was going, and he heard behind him. He's like, "Oh, it's the Headless Horseman. It's the Headless Horseman. I'm sure he's coming to get me." He said, "Gunpowder, go. Yeah. And Gunpowder tried to go faster, but Gunpowder was so old, and they were just a mile from the bridge to the churchyard. And he says, "Head to the churchyard, Gunsmoke, head to the churchyard." And behind he heard of the hooves coming, and Ichabod looked, and behind him was a great big black steed, and a man with a black cape flowing in those crisp, cold night wind. But instead of a head, there was a great big jack-o'-lantern with fiery orange eyes. And Ichabod said, "Oh, it's the Headless Horseman." And he's like, "Go, Swan, Gunpowder, go." And Gunpowder ran, and the Headless Horseman went, and Ichabod Crane almost. Gunsmoke put one step on the bridge, and that great big Headless Horseman took that jack-o'-lantern head and threw it at Ichabod Crane. And in the morning, when the children went to school, Ichabod Crane was not there, which was strange. And later that day, the town folks found Gunpowder, that swayed back old horse, just chewing the grass in the churchyard. And they went to Ichabod Crane's room where he was staying, and all of Ichabod's books were there. But it was said that night the Headless Horseman found a new